Everyone, welcome back to the Wild Nutrition Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Heskett, and we got another episode today. And today's topic is going to be not taking things at face value, which is going to be tough because there is just so much information out there. But it's very important, and we're all going to be guilty of this. But it's important to catch yourself when you are doing it. I saw a couple videos over the weekend, and also not applying a lot, using logic, but then going and backing it up with what actually happens. What I mean by that is, before I get into taking things at face value, there's a few people where they're like, well, if you think about it, then I'm trying to think of I didn't actually come up with an idea. I should have watched one of the videos first, but they're like, if you think about, I know a good one. So there's someone who is on the internet right now saying how meat is secondary protein. So all protein comes from the sun. The plants use sun energy, which technically is right. Therefore, plants are primary protein and meat is secondary protein, and therefore not as good as plant protein. But it's just backwards. One, humans can't photosynthesize. We can get stuff from the sun. That's, we produce vitamin D through UV radiation, but we have research showing that plant proteins aren't absorbed as well. A lot of times they are lacking in certain amino acids. So a lot of times you need more protein for building muscle on a plant-based diet to get all the amino acids. Now you could supplement with amino acids, but to get the same anabolic effect, like hitting the leucine threshold. And I'm not talking about anabolic steroids. I'm talking about getting an effect to where we're maximizing muscle growth or muscle retention in a dieting phase, or during a maintenance phase, just retaining that muscle, getting the biggest anabolic effect after a training period or whatever. A lot of times we need more protein. So the thought process is like, oh, well, that's the first thing. Therefore, that's primary and we shouldn't be eating secondary because that has to utilize. Therefore, things are lost, and it doesn't work that way. And there's a couple other things in the body that also it's similar, or we just don't have the research to back it up. So one thing is methylfolate. So you might have heard, this is a Gary Brecka thing. This is something I learned through the book Dirty Genes, which I recommend. But people with MTHFR, SNPs, SNPs, which is a genetic variation. Some people's gene functions a little bit slower, and therefore they don't do as well with folic acid. So the thought is, okay, instead of folic acid, which is quote unquote synthetic, we'll use methylfolate because that's what the body uses. Unfortunately, we don't have any research to show that methylfolate with pregnant women helps with reducing neural tube defect. We have plenty of research showing that folic acid supplementation helps reduce neural tube defect. I think that's it. It's something, the neural tube something. We have research showing that. We don't have it with methylfolate. So it's not to say that methylfolate can't work. It is saying that we don't necessarily know. We think it will work, but we don't have any evidence. So you take that risk. We know this other thing works. We have clear data. It's very affordable. Methylfolate's much more expensive. And even though it's not that expensive, for some people, it's make or break. Like we're talking, it's pennies for folic acid, and it's found everywhere, versus methylfolate's more expensive. So it's a risk you take. So even though intuitively you're like, well, that should work better, not necessarily. So this logic is applied to many things. Vegans and carnivores use it. Well, you see a gorilla and they're massive, therefore, and they just eat plants. Well, they actually eat bugs too, but their bodies are different than ours. I don't know gorilla anatomy and physiology. However, their intestinal tract is longer. I do know that. They might be able to produce all the essential amino acids. They might be able to produce vitamin C. We can't produce vitamin C, and we don't produce all the amino acids. That's why there's essential and non-essential amino acids. Like your branched chain amino acids are considered essential. Our bodies can't produce them. Well, some animals can produce all of the amino acids. Therefore, they technically don't need to get amino acids elsewhere. So we can't apply that logic. Same thing goes with the carnivores of like, well, we have canines. Well, it's the smallest, but that's because we never needed to develop them because we cook our food. This is the way people is like, well, yeah, meat was something that was really sought after, but we see with hunter gatherers that to this day still don't just eat just meat, and they a lot of times eat a variety. And believe it or not, people are kind of lazy. No surprise, it's called relaxing. It's not laziness. It just looks lazy to like our very like rat race society. That if food's available, so there's a tribe in Africa, I forget which tribe, but there's these nuts that during certain times of the year they're just loaded with them, and they know how to produce them. There's a certain like there is a toxin in them, and they have to process it. God forbid processing. They have to process it, but they are just loaded with all these nuts, and it's like, so someone went over. It's like, why aren't you going out and hunting? Like, why would I go out and hunt and go walk or travel miles for something that may or may not happen, and then have to drag something back when we have all these nuts laying around? Like, we don't need animal skins right now or anything. We have all these nuts laying around right now, right outside of our village or even inside the village. Why would I do that? We can get all of it right here, and then once that starts to run low, we can go out and hunt. And again, this is Africa, so it's not like they can freeze anything, or it's going to spoil pretty quick if they go and hunt. So just showing like carnivore is not true either. And if we look at the Inuit, they did use herbs. They tried to get berries and other things as much as they could, but also their diet was very high in omegas from fish, but also seals. So though people will be like, well, the Inuits ate pretty much all this meat, and well, there was incidences of heart disease, there was incidences of cancer, but back then there wasn't any testing. So people are like, oh, their incidents of cancer were, well, what did they die of? Old age is usually what the thought is. And apparently, so there's a doctor I follow who is like 50% Inuit, and he's like, you can't do their diet. And I follow a hunter who lives in Alaska, and she fosters a lot of native. I don't want to say this the wrong way. I'm not sure if they're Inuit, because there are other tribes up there, but I don't want to get canceled over this. But Native Americans up in Alaska, she fosters them, and she will try to feed them their traditional diet. So you can only get this food as someone who is a native to the region. So like, you can't go up and try it, or even Alaskan residents can't necessarily go up and try it. You have to be native to get access to it. So it was like seal fat. Well, apparently seal fat's very, very rich in omega-3s because their diet's pretty much just fish. It also tastes like fish. So imagine like fishy, like a big chunk of fishy fat, like all the beef fat in the world, or like a pork belly, but it's fishy. I'm like, okay, that does not sound appealing whatsoever. Because she posted, the reason I bring this up, she posted things like, would I try it? If someone offered it to me, I'm not going to go out of my way and do it, but if I was offered, I would absolutely try it. But that does not sound appealing whatsoever. So apparently that seal tastes like it's just fishy, which does not sound lovely. I guess diver duck would be the closest you could get to it here. That would be accessible to most people. But yeah, that not good. Anyways, getting back to not taking things at face value. So I'm about to do, after I finish recording this podcast, about to do something. There was a thing posted to TikTok. I saw a video, And someone saying that this energy drink, I believe Celsius, is equivalent, and it's not, to 4 to 5 cups of coffee. Like, you drink one of these, it's like drinking 4 to 5 cups of coffee. Like, wow, that's a lot of caffeine. Can they legally put that in there? No, they can't. And this is the issue that has sprung up with energy drinks is they're really not that high. Some of them are high in caffeine, but a lot of them are not that high in caffeine. They're going to have, like, Red Bull has the equivalent of 1 cup of coffee. Celsius is 200 milligrams. Now, a 8-ounce thing of coffee is going to have about 95 milligrams of caffeine. So we can round up to 100. So 100 milligrams caffeine. So every 100 milligrams caffeine is 1 cup of coffee. So that's coffee. So if you have a Celsius, that's 200 milligrams. It's basically 2 cups of coffee. Some of them are 300 milligrams, but that's kind of where it tops out. I don't know if any pre-workout supplements go higher than that, but 300, 350, because legally they don't want to get in trouble pushing above that. And some of the issues with energy drinks tends to be, one, they taste very good. Like, I like the Ghost ones. They taste really good. Especially like the tropical mango one and the orange creamsicle. They're wonderful. So wonderful that I could easily see someone not knowingly drink 2. And that would be, I think those are 300. It might 2 or 300 milligrams caffeine. I could definitely see someone doing 2 of them and then be like, oh shit, that was too much. But it's not. So 4 to 5 cups of coffee would be 2 of those, or 4 cups of coffee would be 2 Celsius, not 1. People get into issues when they drink multiple. They go above the serving size. And those usually will say, like, don't drink more than X in a 24-hour period, or don't drink more than 1 per day. Something to that effect is usually on them. So But if you just took that at face value, you'd be like, oh shit, this is why it's killing. And then that spreads. And this is where misinformation spreads really fast, because you're like, oh shit, I should tell so-and-so her son drinks it. Or someone else I know drinks these all the time. And then you say, like, oh my God, did you know? Holy shit. And it's just misinformation. It's taking something at face value rather than looking, wait, what's actually on the nutrition label? Because if it's 4 to 5 cups of coffee, I can tell you, anyone who's kind of sensitive to caffeine's going to have a problem with that. And that would be a lawsuit real quick. And there's other stimulants you can add to things. You usually see those in pre-workouts. Some of them aren't stable long-term in liquid, but also a lot of times they have other side effects. And if you're doing an energy drink, you want it accessible to as many people as possible and not as few. For example, I'm very sensitive to something called yohimbe or yohimbine. I forget how you pronounce it. So about 25% of the population, I think that's the percentage, gets like flu-like symptoms with it. So if I take a supplement with it, and it's a powerful fat burner, it's apparently a sexual enhancement because it really helps open up blood flow. So some people take it for that reasons, especially men. And I can tell you, it kind of works that way. However, I feel like garbage. So I will get, it can be 95 out. I will get chills. My nose will start running. I get I can't focus. Like, I get a brain fog with it. So it doesn't really help me whatever. And then I'm just like wired. I'm like, I can be tired. Like, oh my God, I'm so exhausted after that leg workout. I kind of need a nap a couple hours later, but I'm like wired, but tired. So it affects different receptors than just caffeine. Caffeine affects multiple receptors. This affects only some of them. But for me, if you put that in an energy drink, I'm going to have a bad time. And not everyone knows that. But a lot of people are a little bit more cautious with a pre-workout rather than an energy drink. And that supplement you're seeing a little bit less and less. So there's other things you can put into a supplement, and you should absolutely look at nutrition labels before you buy any energy drink, supplement, etc., to know exactly how this is going to affect me. Is it just basically some B vitamins and caffeine? Essentially, that's what most of them are. Yes, the Ghost ones have alpha GPC, which helps with your brain to produce acetylcholine. It can be at the right dosage, a slight performance enhancer in the gym. There's a few other ingredients there that, yeah, they work. I think they're sort of a good dose, but like Monster and stuff, I always like to, like, after a hangover, the Monster Rehab, because there's some electrolytes in there, and I could get it down. I didn't want coffee, so that would be, if we knew we were going like bar hopping or anything, I would get the Monster Rehab, the lemonade flavor, and that would be like the next morning is like, just give me that so I can function and live. But it's important to go through that nutrition label, understand how much caffeine, because if you think, say the Ghost, if I have 2 cups of coffee and then that Ghost energy, that's 5 cups of coffee. That's way too much for me. It's like, I'm going to feel like garbage and then I'm going to crash really hard later. But maybe for a pre-workout later on, I'll be okay. It's still a lot of caffeine. I'm not going to deny that. That's a lot of caffeine. But my wife will drink like half a lot of times. Or maybe I have 1 cup of coffee and then that. Or maybe, maybe I don't pick that one because I know of how much caffeine's in there, and I pick this other one. So it's important to understand how these different things are going to affect you, and not just taking things at face value. Even some of them are marketed towards being hardcore. I think it was like the NOS Energy back in the day. I don't even know if it's still a company, but it's marketed as like the most hardcore one, and it's more expensive than the others. And you get it and you're like, it's not that much of a difference. Yeah, there's a little bit more caffeine. Yeah, whatever. You can only really drink one. I could kind of drink 2 of the others. Red Bull, everyone always like shits on Red Bull. It's like the lowest energy ones. I think it is. What is it? Caffeine in Red Bull. 80 milligrams caffeine. So it's less than 1 cup of coffee. It's more like a European cup of coffee. That would be like a 6-ounce thing of coffee, I guess. In a 8.4 fluid ounce. So if you get the Red Bull, Bull 12 ounce, is 102. So basically 1 cup of coffee in the 12 ounce. So the 8 ounces is less than 1 cup. But a lot of people will shit on Red Bull because they're like, oh my God, it's the equivalent of like 3 cups of coffee. No, it's 1 cup of coffee. Now, where people get in trouble is you go out drinking and you get vodka Red Bulls and you drink 3, 4, 5 of those. That's where you get in trouble, because if you had caffeine elsewhere in the day, the half-life of caffeine for a lot of people is about 6 hours. Now, there's slow metabolizers and fast metabolizers. People with a faster caffeine metabolism will burn through that faster. Those of people with slower, that will last longer in their system. So if you have caffeine earlier in the day, the half-life, so when half of it's gone, is about 6 hours, and then 6 hours after that. So you see a lot of people are just, myself included, running around with caffeine basically always in the system. Because if you have 300 milligrams in the day, which is not unusual for me, so half-life is 6 hours. There's going to be 150 milligrams left 6 hours later. At the 12-hour mark, 75 milligrams left. At the 18-hour mark, we're going to have, like 30 or like 37, something like that. 75 divided by 2. I'm not doing mental math right now. I'm sure if I was not recording myself, like trying, especially with the video, like extra pressure on myself. But we're going to be in the mid 30s. 35 would be 70. So yeah, it's 37 and a half. So, okay. Half-life after that. Now we're at the 24-hour mark. So yeah, most of it's gone, but we're not including if we had caffeine, like that 300 milligrams we're saying is in the morning. But what if we did 200 milligrams and then in the afternoon, like I do a lot of times, there's another 100 milligrams. Okay, well that's different. All of a sudden we just like reintroduce a whole bunch of caffeine. So yeah, 200, 6 hours later, now we're back to 100, but we added also another 100 milligrams. So we're back to 200 6 hours later. And so 6 hours after that, we're at 100, and then we're at 50, and then we restart. Um, that's like normal metabolism. So this is where some people are more sensitive than others to caffeine. Um, anyways, Red Bull's really not that, and it's not healthy by any means, but it's not that bad as most people have like kind of really shit on it. Um, so it's not like super bad. What was another thing that was? Oh, the hydrogen water. That's a new one. I'm debating doing a video on this. I just saw James Capola did a response. I saw a chemist do a response. So this one's new, thanks to Gary Brecka and this one other chiropractor with her bullshit. Most of her shit's total. She's giving medical advice as a chiropractor. Giant red flag there first. So basically, it is instead of sparkling water with CO2, it's hydrogen. So there's a couple different ways to do it. So apparently, unlike CO2, it's very difficult to get hydrogen into water. So it needs to be very pressurized, apparently more so than CO2 or at least equivalent to it. So you have to push CO2 in, but CO2 is much heavier than hydrogen. Or you can, there's like three ways to do it. One's, pressurizing, and another one, which these stupid water bottles do, is electrolysis, which is applying electricity and breaking up things in the water into hydrogen and I guess oxygen. But then it has to get pressurized in some fashion, or hydrogen's very light, so it just escapes. The problem that he brought up was, unless you're using distilled water, there's other things in the water, other minerals and things, and now you're having a chemical reaction. You're electrifying the water. You might be creating some contaminants in there that would have never happened on their own, but you applied electricity to the water. That's how these work through electrolysis. This is how some people clean their cast iron pans. You're doing for the water you're about to drink. You're applying electrolysis. And so there might be, say, iron, calcium, magnesium, fluoride, there's plenty of chemicals. You can do a test strip on your water, but you can also, if you have city water, see what is kind of like in your water. Sodium, if you have like a water softener, and chloride. So all these things are in there. So now all of a sudden you're going to give it energy to actually do things that would never have happened, have interactions. And essentially, there is some data showing that some sort of hydrogen therapy might be effective. Why is this? Well, what we breathe in is oxygen, and sometimes oxygen doesn't have enough electrons. So if you remember back to basic chemistry, you have your protons, neutrons, and electrons buzzing around like the outside of the atom. And if you snooze during chemistry and never had it, protons, neutrons, and electrons. Well, some of these things, oxygen's guilty of this a lot of times, sometimes don't have enough electrons. This produces what's called a free radical. So it's going to go and scavenge and find something that it can latch onto that has another electron. This is where you get like O2, H2O. Hydrogen has one electron. And so a lot of times they like to have a two. Doesn't like necessarily having just one electron. So it will go and attach to another element, chemical, another element on the periodic table, and that forms our molecule. Molecule. You know what I'm saying? So water, H2O. So these things happen. So if oxygen that we're breathing in, it doesn't have enough electrons, it's going to go into your body, and there's a lot of chemical reactions, and there's a free radical. So it's going to latch onto something, but then that might steal electrons from something else, and therefore it's going to create a free radical somewhere else. And that chemical is going to be like, well, I need enough electrons. I'm going to go. And this is where you get that cascading effect of free radical damage. So putting hydrogen in the body, which doesn't seem to have many, if any, negative side effects, might help by being a free radical scavenger. Might. Problem with the water and taking things at face value. How much hydrogen is there? How much do we need? What's the therapeutic dose? We don't know. How much are in those? Because those aren't medical. They're like $20 off a TikTok shop. You think that's going to give you like the therapeutic dose? I don't think so. You're putting some electricity through water. What is the effective dose? That's important because our bodies already have antioxidant in it, a very powerful one. One, we can eat antioxidants, but glutathione is the master antioxidant in the body. So we have a defense system already. So do we need to take this hydrogen water? I wouldn't until more research comes out because it doesn't appear that there's any side effects. That doesn't mean there's not. You're putting a lot of things into, a gas, a large amount of a gas all the time into your body that's not really naturally occurring. We got an unknown. Now you can experiment with yourself. You can see there is some research backing it, but with these little bottles, we don't know what the therapeutic dose is. So it might be too much. It might be too little. It might be super inconsistent. And so taking things at face value and not knowing, just like, oh, I heard, and usually it's when you're desperate and you're like, oh, I've been struggling with this weight and I feel like garbage all the time. I'm always tired. I just had enough energy. If you drink this hydrogen water, you will have enough energy to do this, this, and this. And then you're like, that's it. And you buy it. And then you're like, oh, well, I also need to do like this, this, and this. And then all of a sudden, placebo effect, you're feeling better. So I'm not saying don't try it. I am not necessarily opposed to it, but there's a lot of marketing going around ever since Gary Brecka. It's not going to hydrate you 300 times better. That's bullshit. It's not going to do a lot of these claims probably that people are putting out there. No, it is probably effective for some clinical populations, but we need more research. And this same thing applies with Shilajit is another thing that's come back. It was like big, started taking off. I experimented with it back in like 2018, 2019. Didn't notice any effect. And so it's kind of like come back. That's another thing where, again, it's like, what is it doing in the body? You're saying it gives minerals. I can get minerals with food. I can take another supplement much cheaper. And like, what isn't? People are saying like table salt's bad, but use Celtic sea salt because there's 82 other minerals in there. But when you look, and personally, we do sea salt because we like the flavor better, and we do pink Himalayan salt and stuff like that because we like it a little bit better. But the other mineral, it's like 0.4%. And then that's of like all the other, like there's all these other minerals in there. And it's like, okay, all the other minerals make up 0.4% because it would taste like garbage otherwise. So that means all of them are this tiny like 0.00% or whatever of what remains. So where's the effect? Because say the calcium, well, we need a gram of calcium a day, basically. Most people, anywhere from 1,200 to 800 milligrams, depending on, and there's wider variation, but essentially for most adults, somewhere between 1,000 to 1,200 milligrams per day. So 1 to 1.2 grams per day. So the little bit of calcium isn't doing shit. The little bit of iron isn't doing shit. The little bit of potassium isn't doing shit when you need, say, 4,000 milligrams, 4 grams a day. And that's, again, taking things at face value. What was the dosage? Why is it doing that? It's just salt. I really like flake salt and stuff. I think it tastes better. You might pick things because maybe there's less processing or there's it's more ethical for the environment? I'm not just saying salt, I'm saying for a variety of reasons, but is it actually healthier than the alternative of the default, which we would consider table salt? Is Celtic sea salt necessarily better? Technically, on paper, yeah, you get all these other minerals, but the difference is so marginal that it's more like personal preference and budget. It is tiny. Like, why is that small amount? If you're saying that salt, like I saw a claim the other day that salt, just having table salt, that causes high blood pressure and all these other issues. But so use Celtic sea salt. It's like, but 99.6% of Celtic sea salt's sodium. Let's fact check me. Percent sodium in Celtic salt. So 84% is sodium chloride. So 0.4% magnesium. So I was off a little bit here. So that's not a great food. No, that's, oh God. That's not good either. Basically, this is saying this is not a good source. So Himalayan salts, 98% sodium chloride, 2% trace minerals. So 2%, so not much. Fact checking myself here. So I was wrong. It's not 99.6. It is 2% of 80 trace minerals. So that means, now we start doing math of like, okay, it's a tiny bit of each one. Magnesium, 33% sodium, but it was like 80% sodium chloride because you get more chloride. So 33% sodium, 50.9% chloride with 34 trace elements. Yeah, this is a terrible source. Anyway, but it's mostly just sodium chloride, just regular salt in these things, and very little of the other stuff. So if there's a benefit, you could take the other minerals separate and get the benefit. You wouldn't necessarily have to have just this, which is the fear mongering. Don't take things at face value. Look into it a little bit. Look at the research. Try to look up PubMed. So let's do, if I pull this up now. So table salt versus Celtic salt research. Mayo Clinic. So it doesn't look like there's anything popping up from PubMed. Might have to do. So with Mayo, what I do a lot of times is if they're citing sources, it's either going to be linked or it's going to be at the very bottom. So there's jack shit there. Research. PubMed. So there's something in natural salt versus refined salt in rats, in salt sensitive rats. But it doesn't look like anything for humans. Comparison between the effects of Himalayan salt and common salt and hypertensive. I don't have time to read. 17 female participants, no significant difference. No surprise. Again, but this took me 2 seconds. Okay, let's actually look up and see the human effects. And there's a few other studies here, but we want to look at like PubMed or go to sites that link, and then you can click the links to go to those studies and see what they're saying. And you should look at multiple. So like I looked at 2. One was salt sensitive rat. So also be aware that when we're looking things up, or people are quoting things, if they're looking at a diseased population, that doesn't mean it's bad for the regular person. For example, let's say, not medical advice. Just giant asterisk before I say this next part. Since penicillin helps stop infections, we should just take penicillin all the time, and that'll just kill off any bacteria that ever enter the system. Terrible advice. You're going to totally nuke your gut. Absolutely awful advice. But penicillin helps patients recover faster after bacterial infection and lowers mortality risk. Yeah, you're going to see that and like, okay, yes, it's beneficial for population with disease versus, so let's say bacterial pneumonia. Okay, it helps with that. That doesn't mean take it all the time. Salt sensitive, someone with an issue with kidney disease, maybe there's something there. But if you have healthy kidneys, it might not make any difference. So a lot of research, a lot of times, is done on disease populations. If we look at keto diet and brain performance on people with epilepsy, ketogenic diet has been shown with certain people with certain types of epilepsy to be beneficial. That doesn't mean it's going to carry over to someone who is in the healthy population. Doesn't mean you're going to get those benefits. It does help those people with reducing epileptic seizures. So don't take things at face value. It is extra work. But before you go and buy things or change up things, we want to take a look to make sure you're not wasting your money and or time on something that's not making much of a difference or even hurting you. And if there's no data on something, it's absolutely a red flag. Because this is the paid off by, so-and-so is being paid by. They don't want us to know. If somebody figures out how to cure cancer, they're going to be a billion, if not trillionaire. Like, that's just the reality. So they're not trying to keep us sick. There is incentive to trying to find a cure. I remember when the C vaccine, that research was going on and they were trying to develop it, I had some clients who were with some of the companies in those, helping with those departments trying to develop it. And there was all hands on deck on those projects. It was, we wanted to push this out because this can be huge for the company. Like the one to come out with the first vaccine, everybody knows the names. Everybody knows the Pfizer, the Moderna, was Johnson Johnson. Like, you knew the companies. They had it was the Moderna vaccine, the Pfizer vaccine. Hopefully, I'm not getting flagged for that. But you knew of those. That was a big push, big name. If you could come up with a cure, that people would be like, holy shit. Now, obviously, we're not going to get political about it or go down in conspiracy theories, but there are people working on developing those vaccines, and it was a big to do. There was a big incentive to actually do it. So if there's a herbal thing or something else that we can take, or the hydrogen in water, there's going to be more research done on it. There's going to be something coming out, be like, hey, this is effective. Now we can take it and then obviously sell it or use it. Because research is expensive. People don't also forget that, like, to do something on a random herb that may or may not be effective, what's the dosage? We have to test all this. Like, it's fucking expensive for something that might not work. We know the mechanisms of some of these other things, so we should work and should be more effective. But there's plenty of things that have come from plants, like aspirin. Ginger is good for nausea. We have research backing that. Peppermint for headaches. I believe there's some research backing that. There is research. There is certain things, certain herbs and other things that are effective, but it's not everything, which is why you do need to not take things just at face value. Anyways, that's going to be where I end here. This is just to get you to critically think before you buy anything, before just ask questions, look it up. The data is there. Read through the whole study. Look at how they did the study, because that's the other thing. If you're like, oh, well, who's the study funded by? Good science is good science. And bad science is bad science. It doesn't matter who the funding is. Now, scientists can have a bias. Everybody's slightly biased, or they might push certain things to have a bias in a study, but you can go and look through it. And let's say it was a vegan company trying to promote, like, we're going to pay for this research and we want it to show when the results come out that doing a vegan diet promotes better muscle growth. Well, we're going to compare the standard American diet, and a lot of people don't eat enough protein, to a high protein vegan diet. What do you think is going to have better muscle growth? They're going to both go through. So you can look and you're like, yeah, but that's terrible. What if we just applied protein equivalent, high protein standard bodybuilding omnivorous diet to a vegan high protein diet, with the protein amounts being equal, or at least maybe like the leucine amount being equal? What then? What would that? So you can go through and look at that, and that's kind of like the sneaky science of, like, they're trying to show, like, give result. The company wants you to, like, we need to the results, like, well, we're going to mess with statistics a little bit to show that this is beneficial, or we're going to pull your funding. And you're like, well, the scientists are like, well, this is literally how I get paid. This is my job. I can't have, I have kids and family, so fuck, how do we do this? But that's open access. The public can read. So you can go through, read it, and be like, this was shit science. Or you can go through it, and even if it's like, actually, no, this is actually really good. This is really well done. And I was wrong with my thought process. It's there. It's available for you. You just have to go and do it a little bit. And as always with supplements, Examine.com helps you out with that. So that's a free resource. They do have a paid thing, but they do give out a lot of the information for free. So you can go and see many of the supplements out there if there's research on it and what the effects are before buying. And that's much easier to go through that than it is to, like, manually research PubMed or even Google search PubMed. That's where we're going to end it today, guys. Thanks for tuning in. As always, I appreciate you guys. So give it 5 stars if you like the podcast. Rate it, sub, give it a like, depending on what channel you're watching it on. And then we have the Master Your Macros guide down below. We also have one-on-one coaching application down below. And there's also just links. If you don't follow me on social media, make sure to go and follow me there, where I do give out smaller tips day to day, but you can also just message me in private, send a private DM, PM, whatever you want to say, and have a conversation with me, ask me things if you want. Anyways, thank you guys, and enjoy the rest of your week.